So we're taking a look now, the race to mass adoption. What's been built and where do we stand today? Well, if you have cryptocurrencies, how often do you really use them? Are they something you save or are they something that you spend? I have two very influential people in the cryptocurrency space, Wendy and Carl, that are joining me on the line. And we're just going to share our stories and see where things stand moving forward. So guys, first of all, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
and what's interesting is you both are calling from retrospective parts of the world. Carl, you're in Thailand. Wendy, you're in LA. And I want to jump in, and Wendy, I'll start with you. Cryptocurrencies as a means of payments and this pave way, this motion to mass adoption. Cryptocurrencies, do you use them to pay for items at all?
So I have a couple experiences. Actually, last week I tried to pay for one of my VPN services with Bitcoin, directly with Bitcoin, and I had a major issue. The issue that I had was, number one, the volatility. Number two, I didn't send enough because of the fees, and I was stuck having to owe a balance of like $4. But the particular wallet that I was using only allowed for me to send like transactions with a minimum of like $20. So I had to cancel the transaction, wait to get my Bitcoin back, and then pay with fiat. So it was a little bit complicated, but I like for my business, I do accept Bitcoin and Ethereum. I accept crypto payments from companies and from my clients. And I generally, instead of just paying directly with crypto, I will just use the crypto.com app because it just works so much better with the card because it converts it to fiat. But paying with crypto is not as easy as everyone makes it sound to be.
That's a really interesting point. And Carl, I'd love to get your take on it. What's your thoughts? Do you use crypto to pay for items at all?
So professionally, yes, back and forth, back and forth from clients and different like companies, because in crypto it's just much easier to send in Bitcoin or through between different Binance accounts or whatever. That's like easy, but that's more professionally. If you go into like the private spending for like personal items, I never use Bitcoin. I never use crypto. I think that mostly it's just because of the fact that people don't accept crypto. If they did accept crypto, I would probably be more pushed into getting more used to buying things with Bitcoin and crypto. So I'm not really in the habit of doing it. So even if I see that a place accepts Bitcoin, it's still much easier to use fiat, and it will probably continue to be much easier to use fiat for another few years. The user experience in crypto and Bitcoin is still not all the way. So I think that we have to wait for second layer solutions to develop and be much easier to use, and we need to see a bigger network effect. And I still think that Bitcoin is more of a store of value today anyways. We need to see Bitcoin transform into money, and I think that second layer solutions is something that we need. But yeah, so far I'm not really using Bitcoin. I would love to, but there are also this phenomenon where people tend to spend bad money and save good money, just like when we went off of the gold standard and coins started to, or they started to get diluted much earlier. First they were gold, and then they started to get diluted with other cheap metals. And of course, people spent the cheap metal and saved the gold, of course. So eventually the coinage was just cheap metals. And I think that Bitcoin might experience something similar, where all of us hodlers, we save our Bitcoin and we spend our fiat, and that's how I live. I only keep a small portion of my wealth in fiat in the bank, just enough to survive on a daily basis. The rest is in Bitcoin, and I don't want to spend my Bitcoin. I want to save it for the future.
I agree with you on that, Carl, because I feel that way when I accept crypto for payment, especially Bitcoin. I kind of want to hold on to it, but I do have to cash it out for payments. Bitcoin, like I can't pay my mortgage with Bitcoin. I can't go to my local grocery store and pay with Bitcoin directly. I can use like, an on-ramp like that will automatically convert crypto to fiat and then use the card that way. But it's still too complicated. And also too, one of the things that I do notice is that it's really hard to use. It's super hard to use. And where I come from, a lot of people, they just want to pay their bills. They want to buy food for their family, and they want to, just take care of things, and they want to do it in a very easy way. And using crypto, it's still too hard. Like to have to go back and to send Bitcoin or Ethereum via like a wallet address. That's still really long. It's still complicated. A lot of people don't have time, or they don't want to really deal with it. And then dealing with with your private keys and all that type of stuff. They just want their money and they want it fast. And then also too, we're dealing with volatility. When you have a volatile asset, people don't like that. There's people that are living paycheck to paycheck, especially how I grew up, and we don't have time to deal with the volatility. Big, oh, price is going to go up, so let me wait a little bit to go ahead and sell here. We need to cash our crypto out now, and we need to be able to pay our bills now. And I think that volatility is a really big turnoff for businesses and for consumers in general.
And you've both made some really interesting points, I think, especially when it comes to if you are getting paid in cryptocurrencies, you do see it more as a store of value and something which you're less likely to spend and interact with in day-to-day life. Sometimes when we do see cryptocurrency news that does make headlines, throughout the past 6 months, for example, one thing that stood out for me was a Coinbase card, for example, and these cards that actually resemble a debit card, or Bitcoin wallets that resemble a credit card, which show that step and that gateway into more traditional life that people may be used to spending. So when we look at cryptocurrencies being used in circulation and this future ideology that people would use digital currencies as a payment method, would we have to see something which is more user-friendly, like a cryptocurrency debit card, for example?
I think that we do need to, but volatility is a really big problem, like especially with Bitcoin, because, I want to say it was yesterday or the day before we had a really big drop. It was like $1,000 drop. And for somebody that's living paycheck to paycheck, that is relying on like even the conversion factor, like let's say it's like even a $5 difference, that $5 can add up to somebody. And when you're dealing with people that are in third world countries that, they don't have a lot of money, that could really impact what they're able to spend their money on. So I think that is a pretty big barrier for people currently.
Yeah, and I think that also, I know that it would be amazing to see Bitcoin being used as a form of money today, widely across the globe. But I think that we need to realize that this is going to take much longer than people expected back in the 2017 bull market. I mean, people have been thinking that this is going to take place next week, next month, maybe before the end of the year. But I think we're going to have to wait at least another 5 years, maybe 10 years. Honestly, I think we might have to wait 20 years before we see Bitcoin being used as a form of money. So I think that we need to have that perspective. And from that perspective, Bitcoin is actually doing very, very well. I think today Bitcoin is a store of value. And that's fine. That's already an amazing use case because if you look out in the world, you don't have many reliable store of values where you have no third-party risk and no default risk. Most of the assets around the world that you're holding as a store of value, you always have at least some type of third-party risk and always some kind of default risk because, I mean, fiat money, that's debt. It's someone else's IOU. Bonds, same there. When you look at real estate, you have third-party risk. You have, I mean, all these assets. You always have to rely on someone. Gold, I guess, would be the closest to Bitcoin. But if you hold millions and millions of dollars worth of gold, I think that you still would have to rely on someone to keep it safe for you. But actually, I am a gold advocate. I love gold. That's where I come from, actually, before I went into Bitcoin. So I see the goods, and I see the pros and cons with both Bitcoin and gold. But the amazing thing about Bitcoin is that it is a digital store of value without third-party risk. So it is something that we have never seen before. And I think that that's fine. That's already, like I said, an amazing use case, and it's going to change many people's lives, people that cannot rely or shouldn't rely on banks, for example, or cannot trust their governments. And we might think that we can trust our banks in our country or our government in our country, but there can come a day when all of that or that illusion completely just evaporates. I think this is exactly what was very close to happening back in 2008, but we saw of course, big manipulation of interest rates and the currency supply, which basically just pushed these problems into the future. And I think that very soon we might see banks once again end up in a big credit crunch where we see problems in the banking system, and eventually we might see these restrictions on ATMs. You cannot withdraw more money than they allow you to, and at this stage of the crisis, which I think we are going to end up in at some point, people will wake up to the fact that this system is fundamentally flawed and there is a need for an alternative. And of course, the first obvious choice for people would be gold. But I think that as soon as people realize the fundamentals of Bitcoin and the fact that Bitcoin is an alternative to gold, but it's digital, then we will see a big demand for Bitcoin, because gold has been the best form of money and store of value for thousands of years. But today we are in a digital world, and all of the payments today are digital, and we're moving more and more towards into a digital economy. So to me, Bitcoin makes sense, and I know that people will realize the same thing as I have. But it will take some time, and it will take a financial disaster probably.
Carl said a couple of really interesting things here. So number one, we are for sure going to have some economic turmoil. We're seeing it right now. We're going to have the collapse of just a lot of stuff, especially in the United States. Generally in the United States, it takes about a year for everything to catch up, especially with coronavirus and all the civil unrest that's going on. I think that we are going to have essentially another market crash, worse than we've seen, even worse in 2008. So there is that. When you're talking about gold and you're talking about storing wealth, yes, gold is a great solution. But at the end of the day, if you do need to flee from your home, if you need to flee from an oppressive government, or if there's civil unrest in your neighborhood, carrying mounds of gold or carrying like a 300-pound safe is not, it just doesn't work. It's easier to carry a ledger. So that, like, God forbid I had to flee and take my family and flee, I would grab my ledger before I grab my diamonds or my jewelry and stuff like that. Another thing that Carl touched on was that adoption is not going to take place in the next 5 years. I agree with him there, because I feel that this generation, like my generation, can kind of pick up and understand the tech, even though the tech behind Bitcoin is still a little complex. Even after reading the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper a few times, there's some things in there, some verbiage in there that's still a little bit hard to understand, even for me. And I've been in this space for a little bit of time. So I can only imagine people that I know reading the Bitcoin white paper and not necessarily understanding it, because it is complex. So I think that not necessarily our generation is going to kind of pave the way for mass adoption, but probably my daughter's generation. The next generation or two will be able to use it. They're very tech savvy. My daughter's 3. She can use a tablet. She knows how to FaceTime people. So I think for her generation, it will work out and it'll be easier to kind of integrate, but it still does need to be made easier to use. And on top of it, the scary thing about Bitcoin that a lot of people don't like to talk about is that, let's say I go to my bank account and I take all of my fiat and I transfer it and I put it into Bitcoin. What happens if I lose my private keys? What happens? There's no third party. I mean, I understand the part with Bitcoin, and the important part is not having a middleman, not having a third party, me being financially in control of my cryptocurrency. But at the same time, that's scary, because if you're talking about a lot of wealth and you put it onto a ledger or a Trezor or whatever it is, and you lose your private keys, you lose your wealth. So I think that is a little bit of a turnoff for most regular people that value their currency and value their money.
And this is a really interesting point, because I think what you're saying here is we are painting a landscape for example, even fintech banks like Revolut, which don't have a personal store where you can actually attend into, which is something that the older generations, our parents and our grandparents, were very used to doing. The idea of not going into a physical bank is something that our generation is used to now. So the generation after us might be more acknowledging and open to digital currencies and online wallets. And it's just about creating this onboarding process, which might take 10 to 15 years, say. You've highlighted some of the issues there with Bitcoin. Would you say that maybe there is the future cryptocurrency that is adopted, it might be an alternative token that might not even be on the market yet, that might be faster, but also might be slightly centralized with some form of third party, just to mitigate some of these risks that you've mentioned? Or is that completely off the table?
Well, 100% they're going to be issuing a US digital dollar soon. There's a lot of different acts and laws they're being talked about right now and being pushed. I've been following this on my channel. I've had Jason Brett come on my channel and talk about it. He's been following it as well. And there is going to be a US digital dollar, and China is also going to have their own digital currency as well. So we're going to see that. But the issue with that is, like, it will be a stable coin, but the issue with that is then the government will be able to track everything that we are spending our money on, and that digital dollar will have some sort of FDIC protection and whatnot. And I know that it's completely different than Bitcoin because Bitcoin is decentralized, but I feel that with the US, or with the digital currencies that are going to be created by different governments, I feel like it's going to also help push mass adoption, because may already be used to using it, and then people will start to realize, hey, I don't want people knowing what I'm spending my money on. I do need a little bit of privacy. So they may go ahead and then kind of convert their digital dollar into a different type of cryptocurrency to kind of, get some anonymity and some privacy as well. And there's different ways that you can mix your coins and do that. But I think that might also help kind of start adoption, even though that might not necessarily be the way everybody has envisioned in their mind.
And Carl, I want to turn to you now because you're very openly a Bitcoin advocate. So what's your take on the matter?
Yeah, so when it comes to government fiat, there's no need to try to make another government fiat. I mean, they will do it. They will make these government cryptocurrencies or whatever we should call them, but it's just another form of fiat. Maybe it's a more effective fiat or whatever, but fiat nonetheless. And that is something that we, of course, need to educate the mainstream about. When it comes to other cryptocurrencies, altcoins or whatnot, I believe that there will never ever be an altcoin that can ever compete with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is unique. It is the only decentralized blockchain. You can never replicate this. Bitcoin was born out of a black hole, and there's no way you can recreate the creation of Bitcoin. It's like it was an environment that simply cannot be recreated. And I think that all the altcoins that we see today are more or less centralized, and there's always a degree of trust. You have to trust either a CEO, or you have to trust developers. You have to trust people to take either this direction or the other direction, and they might have the best intentions for sure, but you have to trust these people. And with Bitcoin, there is simply no one you have to trust. You simply have this mathematical equations and this cryptography, and as long as 1 + 1 is 2 today and 1 + 1 is 2 tomorrow, then you can continue to trust that Bitcoin will continue to add blocks every single day. And I think that Bitcoin will be the money of the world in the future. I think that Bitcoin has a great chance of becoming the best form of money in the world. It is already the best store of value in the world, in my opinion. Depends on the time horizon you have. Of course, on a day-to-day basis, it's a horrible store of value because it can lose 10% in 5 minutes. But if you drag out your time horizon to, let's say, a few months or maybe a few years, then if you compare with the US dollar, for example, of course, on a daily basis, the US dollar is a much better store of value than Bitcoin on a daily basis, because on a daily basis, it actually doesn't lose much value at all. But let's take a look at 2 years, 5 years. The US dollar continuously loses value year over year through inflation, and it actually lost 97% of its value ever since 1913, and continue to lose value in a more parabolic fashion, and especially now as we see the trillions of dollars getting printed. So I think that Bitcoin will eventually become a form of money when we have these second layer solutions getting adopted, because we need Bitcoin to become much cheaper and much faster, because on-chain transactions are slow, and some people think that's a problem, but actually the fact that Bitcoin is slow, that's not a bug, it's actually a feature, because it's security. When you create an altcoin that is instant and super cheap, then you compromise the security for convenience, and the whole point is to have a secure way and a safe way to transact value online in a decentralized way, and that's why Bitcoin is slow. But these second layer solutions, they can eventually give Bitcoin near instant transactions and near zero fees. And of course, you do compromise some of the decentralization, but not nearly as much as you do with most of the altcoins. And in the future, when you buy a cup of coffee, you don't need the full decentralization of Bitcoin to buy a cup of coffee. But all of these final settlements, when you send bigger amounts of money, maybe thousands or millions of dollars, then these transactions will be done on chain. And but yeah, so basically, I think that Bitcoin will become the best form of money in the world, and there's no way that you can have an altcoin that can compete with Bitcoin, because they will always be more volatile than Bitcoin, because they will always have a lower market cap. That's my opinion. And if you have two different forms of money, and with Bitcoin and the secondary solutions, when it has instant transactions, and you have an altcoin that also have nearly instant transactions, but the altcoin is much more volatile, then obviously you will use the most liquid money and the least volatile money, and that will continue to be Bitcoin. So I'm bullish on Bitcoin. I'm not necessarily bearish on altcoins, but I am bearish on altcoins against Bitcoin. So I think that in terms of in value against Bitcoin, altcoins will continue to lose in the long run, and that's why I am 95% in Bitcoin in my crypto portfolio.
And Wendy,
The
I want
only
to get, yeah, you go ahead. I want to ask your
I'm sorry.
insights on this.
Yeah, no. So I understand about the second layer solutions, but the only thing that worries me about that is that there is a person, there's going to be a CEO, there is going to be a founder that's going to create a second layer solution on top of Bitcoin. So would that compromise security as far as the transaction goes if you're using a second layer solution? Because I've reported and I've talked about some of that on my channel, and it seems that there's hacks and there's different things that happens. And as far as altcoins go, I own mostly Bitcoin in my portfolio. I like Bitcoin and I like Ethereum, and I think Bitcoin is a great store of value for the long term. But I do think that there needs to be altcoins and stablecoins. Stablecoins are great because you can safely hold your value, like when there's volatile periods of Bitcoin when that occurs. And another great thing about altcoins, and I'm not saying we need 7,000 altcoins or 4,000 altcoins, but I do like altcoins because they do bring competition to the market. And I feel that with competition, it's going to provoke and it's going to make people that are building on top of Bitcoin, it's going to have them push harder and create better options so that people don't go to these altcoins and use those as solutions. So I get the whole altcoin thing, but I also think it's important for competition because I feel that competition makes humans be better.
Is there also the counter argument there, sorry just to intervene, that actually if we do look at CoinMarketCap, for example, I think at the moment there's over 5,000 altcoins and cryptocurrencies listed, that also the altcoin kind of conversation is that there's such a crowded space can almost push off newcomers, because when they go on, if they're not particularly familiar or they don't have someone that can give them some clear instructions on where to look, actually it does become more of a clouded grey market as well.
I agree with you on that 100% because there's a lot of altcoins, a lot of them are not needed, but I do think that it is important that we do have competition in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a true believer in free markets, and I really believe that there should be competition, and I think that everyone should be free to create their own money, and the free market will eventually decide if this money is a good form of money or a bad form of money, just like we've seen throughout history. All bad form of money have always been washed out eventually and have gone back to zero, and good form of money have been more or less successful over a longer period of time. Of course, the best form of money so far has been gold. It's been holding its value for thousands of years. Most forms of money have always just eventually died. They have only been able to work as money for a short period of time in a local area, and that's what I think altcoins could do also. They can hold value. They can be useful for people for maybe some period of time in local areas. But for an altcoin to get wide, like global adoption as a form of money, in my opinion, it's extremely unlikely. Of course, it's possible, but I just don't see a reason why you would choose an altcoin when there is Bitcoin. I can't see an argument for it, because the only argument would be that it's cheaper and faster to transact. But with second layer solutions, if we assume that there will be a second layer solution developed that is almost entirely decentralized, and that it's transparent and trustless, then that basically kills all the arguments for altcoins as a form of money. But there are other use cases for altcoins, of course, and that's why I don't completely disregard altcoins. I also hold some Ethereum. That's you could say that's my only altcoin holding, because I do believe that if you disregard the money aspect, then altcoins for sure could bring some things to the table. And I just wanted to quickly talk about the point that Wendy was talking about, that we need stable coins. And I do believe that's true, but I think that that's only temporarily true. It's only in this transition period that stable coins are needed. Just like when, for example, when cars were developed, there was a lot of confusion. People didn't understand, why do we need cars? So actually, there was one funny picture I saw where they had a horse dragging a car behind it, because you weren't really allowed to use cars this transition period. And also there was another detail that during this transition period, when the cars were introduced, sometimes you have to have a person walking in front of the car with a red flag or something to signal that this is a car coming. So you weren't able to go with the car faster than the speed of a human being. And I think that's kind of an analogy for the stable coins. It's like we're basically using the old technology and the new technology in a transition period, but eventually I think that there will be no need for this old technology, because the new technology is just so much better. And yeah, that's my thoughts about that.
And it seems like the consensus here is that Bitcoin is still leading the race, and there's a lot of core values that Bitcoin holds that just means that it is still remaining the front runner. But altcoins do pose this really interesting need to challenge some aspects of Bitcoin when it comes to volatility and speed that could hopefully get us to that final step of adoption. So Wendy, Carl, thank you so much for your insights today. It was such a pleasure to catch up and have this discussion with you both. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.